Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And I think everyone can answer this. 5 years from now, we will look back and say, actually, it wasn't such a bad idea. Or even we will look back and say it was a good idea. 5 years from now, realistically, I know that Jeep Shoes for Peasants says it should be, 100 years or 50 years, and they all started moving. Do you remember that? About a year ago, they all started claiming that we wouldn't see the benefits for decades, but they'd definitely be worth it. I want to try and do a show that doesn't involve too much combat today. The second hour, I'm going to follow one of the conversations Nick had, because I find it really interesting, the story about degrees, and almost a sense of discouraging people from going to university. It's odd, isn't it? Conservative ministers often seem to discourage people from going to university by talking about vocations and apprenticeships and a trade, which I think is a valid point. And Labour ministers seem to encourage people to go to university by talking about aspiration and ambition and horizons. I suspect the truth lies somewhere, as ever in British politics, between the two positions, okay? And there perhaps also lies the problem of what you get out of university that has nothing to do with your career or your future job. So we'll do that in the second hour. It's Thursday, of course, so Mystery Hour in the third hour. And before that, we will look at this question of what would actually constitute success. So I'll try and answer that, actually, first. The phone lines are open, and do pile in on this. I kind of, if I don't really know what question I'm asking you, I don't know that I can necessarily inflict a interminable introduction on you of a morning. 6 minutes, I'll try. I mean, of course I can, actually. I don't even need a topic to inflict an interminable introduction on you. But on this occasion, for me to look back, well, first of all, how many years do you think, realistically, before we'd be able to say with a degree of consensus or unanimity? We're never going to have unanimity, but with a degree of consensus, what would success look like in retrospect? I get very frustrated, as you know, with any interview that's conducted or any politician that's permitted to talk still about this issue as if there was some undescribed, unspecified Brexit that's better than what's happened. You know, still the Steve Bakers of this world say that they're going to go back to Brussels and be tough. There was a fascinating little juxtaposition on Twitter yesterday that I noted, and I didn't tweet about it, oddly, where the Jeremy Corbyn wing of the Labour Party were effectively arguing to say, we'll get a better deal than the one that is going to be before the House next week, because we'll be much nicer to the negotiators, the European Union negotiators. We'll be more cuddly, we'll be more... I think Shami Chakrabarti said something like, there's a really positive atmosphere in the room when Jeremy meets with these people, so we'll be able to get a better deal. And simultaneously, Steve Baker, I think it was Steve Baker, who's a sort of busted flush, really, after claiming to have about 80 votes of no confidence in the Prime Minister and then failing to muster 48. But he's still a luminary, for want of a better word, within the ERG. And he was effectively saying, or was it Dominic Raab? It was one or the other, was saying that they'll go back to Brussels and be even tougher. It was Dominic Raab. Forgive me, Mr. Baker. I owe you an apology. I'm sure that you have a much more sophisticated and nuanced analysis of the current situation than Dominic Raab. So that is astonishing when you think about it. So there are three paths before us. One is in terms of Brexit actually happening, okay. There's Theresa May's deal, which pretty much nobody likes, but which is being sold by government on the grounds that it's the least bad option if we have to accept that referendum result. So what Theresa May can never say out loud, but which she obviously is screaming inwardly all the time, is we have to leave even though it's not going to be in any way better than remaining. We have to do it because the vote has said so. And that's not a mad position to adopt. I perhaps have been quite rude in the past about that school of thought, because I find unnecessary self-inflicted harm so upsetting. I do understand the logical argument for saying, no, we have to do it. The country has voted to do this thing, and regardless of whether or not you think it's insane, regardless of whether or not anyone can actually demonstrate why it's a good idea, then we have to crack on with it. So those are the three paths. There's the Jeremy Corbyn path, which says we'll be able to renegotiate a better deal by being all nice and cuddly. There's the Dominic Raab school of thought that says we will be able to negotiate a better deal by being more robust and strong. Then there's the deal that Theresa May has actually negotiated. And then there's the rather troubling fact for the Raab and Corbyn schools of thought that the European Union seem highly unlikely to want to reopen negotiations. They've stated categorically that they're not going to, which is fine. And not necessarily copper-bottomed, because negotiations and political machinations often involve retrenchments and revisions. You'll remember Theresa May insisting very, very robustly that there would categorically not be a general election last year. So they do say things, politicians of every hue, and then change their minds. The EU united, saying that they will not, there's nothing else to negotiate, this is as good as it gets, seems to me to be plausible and probable, but it's by no means provable as definitive. However, France is currently dealing with a wave of riots not seen for a generation. Italy, well, there's a massive standoff coming with regard to Italy's debt to the European Union, and that will be complicated, of course, by the fact that they have a sort of Mussolini-style fascist ingenue in place, not leading the country, but Salvini seems to be the most prominent politician there. Angela Merkel, you'll remember, is about to hand over control of her own party. I know that we sometimes seem to be looking at everything through the lens of Brexit, because we have to. We're the ones that are doing it. For the European Union, it's a stone in their shoe. For us, it's the shoe, you know? And I don't think that they are looking at the issue with anything like the urgency or the importance that we are. So I don't know that option of reopening negotiations exists. I suspect it probably doesn't. But then Tony Blair will come out and say if we have another referendum and vote to the European Union might make a concession on immigration that will swing the Remain vote, to which I always respond by saying, well, hang on a minute. All we had to do to swing the Remain vote was to tell everybody what the actual rules regarding immigration were. Tony, you sit down, honestly. Haven't you done enough damage? So what would success look like? I said I'd try and answer that. I also said I wouldn't inflict an interminable introduction on you this morning, so that's 2 out of 2 I've got wrong already. I suppose success 5 years from now, and I'm not, listen, if I can't come up with anything, I'm not being facetious or provocative. 5 years from now, well, will I be able to go and live and work in more countries than I currently can? Or is that not a priority? Or does that sound like I am being glib and facetious? So in terms of freedom of movement, getting rid of it, what would be better than having it? I don't think anyone argue not having it. My life will be better because a French person's freedom to move here has been restricted or removed, or a Polish. I don't know that. I mean, you can make that argument if you want. Financially, well, I suppose I'd want the pound to be stronger than it is now, would I? Unless I own an export company, but I think we can safely say that most of us would rather have the pound in our pocket worth more against foreign currencies than less, wouldn't we? I know people like Andrea Leadsom try to persuade us that it's good news to have a devalued pound in our pocket, but generally speaking, especially if you ever go on holiday abroad, or if you ever buy anything that's been made abroad, you've got the pound, you've got freedom of movement. You could argue that if we have a sovereign parliament, it would all be worth it. But as we saw this week, we've got a sovereign parliament. In fact, it turns out our parliament is too sovereign for people like Liam Fox and the ludicrous Digby Jones, who's complaining about how sovereign parliament is after campaigning to make parliament sovereign. I guess if you've campaigned to make the moon rock as opposed to cheese, and then it turns out the moon was made of rock all along, you're going to look a bit silly, aren't you? You're going to say, well, we need it to be even rockier rock. What would success look like? Well, I've got very little, but that doesn't mean there isn't lots. Let's start in Slough. Kelvin is there. What would success look like? 5, 10? Well, first of all, how many years do you think, Kelvin, before we can start describing success?
I think it's going to be at least sort of, 2 to 3 years once we've got out of this.
So you mean 2 to 3 years after the end of the transition period? So 4 to 5 years from now?
Yeah.
Unless we extend the transition period.
Well, I mean...
so in 4 to 5 years, you think you'll be able to see the fresh shoots of victory. What do you think they're going to look like?
Well, I think it's a country which wouldn't be completely divided at the moment. I think it would be a country which was at ease with itself, because we are
I'm looking for something. I mean, perhaps it's my fault. Something tangible. That's why I mentioned things like laws, freedom of movement, or the performance of the pound. And because, of course, if things aren't better, then people who voted for Brexit are going to have deepened the division even more than they have already.
Yeah,
things actually get worse than they are now.
Turning down of the rhetoric from both sides, really.
No, again, that's not really a tangible policy-based thing. So I want to know what will happen. What would look like success?
I think it would be trading with the EU happily and trading with the rest of the world. Yeah, we do. Yeah, but so in
terms of, again, you're helping me clarify the question. Things that we can't do now, that we will be able to do then, that are worth more than the things that we're giving up, like membership of the single market and freedom of movement.
It's to me. I mean, I wouldn't want to start with the question of what success looks like. I mean, for me at the moment, it's getting out of this complete disaster we're in at the moment.
But that's not very fair on people who voted for Brexit, because I'm sure they didn't intend it to be a complete disaster.
No. James, I voted for Brexit.
Well, there you go. I'm sure you didn't intend it to be a complete disaster. And I'm sure that you weren't just sticking your fingers in your ears when people like me told you that it would be.
No, but I think now we have to... I am fully up for just basically terminating Article 50, because this has been an absolute shambles, omni-shambles.
And what happens after we've done that? So, I mean, with love and respect, we're not going to get any flesh on the bones of what good would look like for the vote that you cast. So what would happen if we terminated Article 50?
I think just return to, before this absolute shambles, before the referendum.
That was almost my question this morning, would everybody like to turn the clock back and pretend that David Cameron never happened?
I think so.
We found it. We've done it. Kelvin, the Brexiter, me, the arch Ramona. We found something we could all... Can we get in a DeLorean sports car, go back 5 years and pretend that David Cameron never happened?
Yeah, James, I disagree with you a lot. Generally, I'm a leaver, but
you're not anymore, by the sounds of it.
Not anymore, no, because it's a complete and utter shambles. I am an ardent leaver, but I think we need now a government of national unity. We need a cross-party cabinet, and we need to... We're in a terrible position with the EU. They've literally got us over a barrel now. I think it's time to turn down the rhetoric and have... I would personally... This is I've been thinking about this morning. This would be my flow diagram of how to get out of this absolute disaster. I would put in a prime minister who was a Brexiteer, a hardened Brexiteer, but he needs to eat his words, basically, and say, this is not going to work, guys. To all the leavers out there, your dreams, it doesn't work. This has been a complete shambles. And we need to...
But that I would say here, it was never going to.
No, I think it could have been.
This I think is where people like me have to wind our neck in. We don't. I find it very difficult. I want you prostrate on the floor, admitting you were wrong and apologising to me for all the abuse that we've received over the last 2.5 years. But that perhaps is a bit petty.
But I think everybody has to swallow. Both sides have to, rein their necks in.
You and me only make friends if I allow you to pretend that it could have gone better. Do you see what I mean? And I'm not ready to do that yet. And I think that's, on my part, I think that's pathetic.
But that's, I can be bigger than you, James, and say, OK, that's fine, James. That's OK. If you want to...
Well, then, so you mean you are going to admit that it couldn't have gone better?
Well,
then you're not being bigger than me.
OK. I lie prostrate for you. That's it. No, it couldn't have gone better.
We shall see. At least we can have a giggle together, and I think there is a lesson there for everybody.
I think everybody needs to come together. Basically, at this point, we need to have a leaver, a Brexiteer PM, who will actually tell the truth and say this has been a disaster, and it's now about how to pull the country together and get ourselves out of this mess. Personally, I'd go back to the EU. I'd say we need an extension to Article 50. I don't care about the money because we're on the hook for 39 billion, Just say, if they're not willing to do that, okay, I think maybe rescinding Article 50.
Call it all off and start again.
Because it's not going to work.
I'm so late for the adverts. This is what happens when a Brexiter and a Remainer start chilling and chatting, you see, instead of just sort of having mic drop moments and dismantlings and violent retribution. However, I have to point out that is not an answer to the question that I eventually got around to asking this morning, which is what would success look like? Kelvin's answer as a self-described arch leaver is success would look like pretending that we'd never voted for this thing in the first place. Okay, I mean, things we won't be able to agree on, how many years it will take. The point at which people like Digby Jones and Jacob Rees-Mogg started saying it might be 50 years or 100 years before we see the benefits would, in a previous life, have been the point at which everybody who was on their side of an argument went, whoa, all right, lads, you stay there, I'm swapping sides. But Brexit spoke to something much deeper than logic and intellect and tradition. It spoke to something that is quite irreconcilable. There's a brilliant column in the Times today by Jenny Russell when she talks about educated, clever, I mean, her very middle-class circle outside church and the Cotswolds with the bankers and the farmers and all the sort of country gents lining up to describe their reasons for still wanting it to go ahead. And she talks about them being dewy-eyed and talking about sovereignty and control and all of these concepts that are, by definition, nebulous. However, if you were to ask what success would look like, I don't think you're going to be able to turn around in 5 or 10 or 50 years and say, well, I just feel better. I'm poorer. I can live and work in fewer countries. The employment situation is diminished, as, of course, that king of the Brexit economists, Patrick Minford, said it would, because agriculture and industry have completely collapsed. I suppose if I was a hedge fund manager, or I'd bet on shorting Britain, or I was heavily invested in countries with lower health and safety and regulations than ours, and I was going to make a mint out of the fact that we'll be eating chlorinated chicken and hormone-laced beef, that might qualify as success. But I don't know if you're going to ring me today if you fit into that category. So for you, Remainer or Leaver, because I think some of us might have to eat a little bit of humble pie, although it'll be humble pie with a fat slice of relief sauce. This is another weird thing about the binary nature of the debate, is that you say, what are you going to do? What are you going to do if it all goes well? And I kind of don't get that question. I say, well, I'm going to celebrate. You know, obviously I'm going to be enormously relieved. I'm going to be proud of the fact that we provided on this programme an as yet infallible guide to what was going to happen next. But if after the final breach is made we get it wrong, then great. I mean, nobody wants to be proved right when they're predicting a disaster, unless they're really, really weird. So what will look like, what will make you feel relieved as a Remainer or vindicated as a Leaver? Phil is in Hull. Phil, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome, Phil.
Yeah. what a shambles. And I know that probably word's been overused, but, you know, for me, party politics has dragged us, the whole country, down into this situation, which is, in my opinion, completely unacceptable. As a Remainer, as a sensible Remainer, and I say that in the way that you're speaking, you know, I remember putting on a Facebook post, there was only one inevitable outcome of this whole thing, and that was Theresa May's deal. That was the only deal that was going to happen. And for people to have not seen that, to me, is you know, I can't understand that. And, you know...
So 5, 10, 15 years from now, when you look back and go, well, maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And I'll be in the same boat as you, hopefully, but you need to describe the boat.
Listen, but it won't be as bad if you know, whether or not this is going to happen or not, but we can't go through with it. It's as simple as that. We cannot go through.
This isn't working out as well. This is not one of my top topics, is it? Because so far we've had a Leaver and a Remainer both saying, I think that looking back 10 years from now, everything will be all right if we don't do it.
Yeah, it's true. And it's not to say, no, the thing is, right, the thing is, you know, if we're sensible about it, okay, you know, it's not going to be the chicken licking scenario where, you know, the Earth's cave, everything's, you know, we'll be okay. But what I'm saying is, we're not, you know, we're in a situation. Why, if we've got a healthy body, why do we want to chop off an arm? why do we want to do that?
Well, no, you're not helping. These are all my lines. Get lost. Forget your own lines. Get stuffed. Seriously, you're supposed.
I didn't realise that you said that.
What I usually say is that the choice between no deal and May's deal is the choice between chopping off 2 legs and chopping off 1 leg. Whereas apparently suggesting that we should hang on to both our legs is a sign of treachery.
James, listen, right?
Go on.
And I'm being serious here. Me and you should be. You know, I'm happy for you to be PM, and I'm happy to be deputy because.
Sorry, mate. We've got to find a job for Lineker. We've got to find a job for Lineker, mate. We can't carve up the big jobs like that. Lineker, he could be foreign secretary. He's worked abroad, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Barcelona, Japan.
So,
I like it.
Yeah.
So, all right, I'm grateful to you. Thanks for the job offer. I'm not sure I could afford the pay cut, but I am minded and, of course, obliged to point out that doesn't really answer my question. So, in terms of tangibles, and maybe even asking for tangibles is wrong, because this is why I found Jenny Russell's column in the Times so interesting and powerful today, and quite dispiriting, actually, as someone who hopes we will be able to call the madness off. I think she makes a brilliant point when she tells us to be careful what we wish for, because there's no guarantee. The polling certainly doesn't give much hope to no Brexit advocates. It inevitably speaks to psychology as much as it speaks to available evidence, just as the whole debate has. But she points out very, very powerfully that the needle's hardly moved at all. So although I am a passionate advocate of no Brexit, I would love to hear about what the world might look like in a few years, or what Britain might look like in a few years post-Brexit, after Brexit has actually happened, under any deal or no deal, that might make me feel a little bit relieved. And the phone lines are open to that end. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. This has gone a bit nuts, actually. I've got a lovely selection of calls on the board, as ever with these issues, a little short of female voices. So if you are sitting there thinking that, you know, we won't be interested in what you have to say, then you're wrong, I'm afraid. I'm very, very interested in what you have to say, especially if you are quite heavily allied with either side, and you can answer the question of, a few years down the line, what will make you go, you see, I was right, or in the case of Remainers like me, OK, yeah, I got that wrong. This is quite fun. I mean it. I know it sounds like I'm really lazy, and if I'm desperately honest with you, people... Do you know, I'm reading the interview that I did with the Radio Times the other day, the listening figures to this programme have gone up by 78% since we went national. So when I refer back to stuff that happened before we went national, I have to acknowledge that the massive majority of people listening won't know what the heck I'm talking about. Beat the Sweet, for example. We should have special badges for people that have been here for the long haul, but I used to do something called the Tuesday Free-for-All, which began life on a day when there was very little news. I hope it's not apocryphal. Every time I share something on air that's apocryphal, I love the bombardment of refutation that I get, the evidence that I'm absolutely wrong and that I made it up. The story I love, at some point in it'd be before the First World War, wouldn't it? Probably. But the BBC wouldn't have been on air, so it must have been after. Well, anyway, there's an apocryphal story about a newsreader effectively saying, and I know that you can't see me, but this is the sound of me tapping my papers on the desk, there is no news. So that's what happened on a Tuesday many, many moons ago. And as a result of that, we decided to let you ring in and suggest the topics that we should talk about. And it worked really, really well until a new management came in and quite rightly pointed out that we were still doing it on days when there was actually lots and lots of news, and that confining it to a Tuesday, if, for example, a war started, was probably not the coolest editorial decision I've ever made. But today I am really interested, or I was at the outset really interested, in ways to talk about Brexit that may have passed me by, because I'm very committed to one particular side of the argument, the sort of evidence-based rational side, and I don't mean that to be condescending. I'm committed to the tangible side, and I'm increasingly sympathetic to people on the intangible side who just want to feel different. And so I'm asking both sides, what will success look like a few years from now? What would make a Remainer look back and go, yeah, OK, my life's improved, and what conversely, of course, would make a Brexiter look back and go, yep, see, I told you, James. I told you, James. And it is James up next in Lichfield. James, what would you like to say?
James, good morning to you. First time caller, so thank you for having me on.
You're very welcome. How polite you are.
So, Thank you, sir. So I want to talk about how Theresa May is an utter visionary. I had this epiphany.
Could you just take your tongue out of your cheek so that I can understand what you're saying?
No. Follow me through on this.
I will.
I had this epiphany. Remember a few months back, the Chancellor stood up and said, the end of austerity. And we all scratched our head and think, so where's the money coming from for that? We've got Brexit coming up. Where's the money coming from? The money is coming from what I call the B, Brexit dividend. And the B refers to your socks from the other day.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So you're not able to describe to me circumstances in which you might feel, actually, it's all gone rather well.
No, follow me through.
Oh, all right.
Lots of public sector organisations and as well as private sector companies have put aside a huge amount of cash as contingency for exiting Europe.
Right.
Both with WTO rules, whatever, they'd have put away contingency saying the world is going to go a bit pear-shaped, we're going to need to spend some money on this. If we don't have Brexit, all of that cash gets released back into the economy. So we've now got a situation where a huge amount of cash is flowing into the economy. Suddenly we're more relaxed. We've got a better attitude towards Europe. So consequently, our trade will be going up with the rest of Europe and the world will be a bigger, better place.
Right.
Further on to this, as we realise that there are an awful lot of people spouting an awful lot of rubbish, we'll have, exactly the same we've had in other countries, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
But you are not taking this seriously, James, in Lichfield. I've given you, I've borne with you, but we're not doing satire this morning.
That would be brilliant, though. Truth and Reconciliation Commission will be hung and drawn and quartered.
But you're joking. I think there will be a Brexit inquiry. I think the more we look at that sort of odd little character, Aaron Banks, and the more we look at what's been going on with Facebook, and the more we look at Russian intervention, and the more we look at law breaking, and certainly Shamir Sani's astonishing court case where a variety of mysteriously funded right-wing lobby groups were found to have deliberately smeared him in an orchestrated campaign revolving around 55 Tufton Street in Westminster and presided over by the ludicrously misnomered Taxpayers Alliance. I'm getting this off pat now, James, aren't I? I think this is going to become a daily occurrence, this little spiel. There will be an inquiry, so calling it a Truth and Reconciliation Commission is potentially unhelpful.
But how many organisations are in that Tufton Street place?
Well, they get very cross if you say that, for example, the Institute of Economic Affairs, which is currently under investigation for a heap of things, they get very cross if you say they're part of it because they're actually round the corner and they just go in for coffee.
Ah, right, okay.
So there's 7 or 8. You've got economists for Brexit, I think. I mean, a whole bunch of them. But we're getting distracted. Are you or are you not able to describe to me a feasible future in which everybody can sort of say, actually, Brexit's gone well?
No, Brexit will go terribly. That's why we need the BBT.
The BBT. 10:39 is the time. Steve's in Boston. Steve, what would you like to say?
I'd just like to say, why can't we just trade evenly around the world and with the EU? You know, just get on with it. I'm a builder. I've just had 8 years of torture, not very good trade. Now it's booming. Around my wife's job, she works for a flexographics company. She trades mostly with non-EU countries, just on the edge of the EU, because the EU, they're not competitive.
So we're in the EU, and she's trading happily with non-EU countries.
Yes, because the EU is not competitive.
Why are we leaving then?
Well, look, we can still trade with them. It's just that we want to free trade.
That's not what I asked. If she's doing great trade with countries outside the EU, how can
she's doing trade with both, but
exactly. So why do we need to leave
non-EU?
Yeah, but she's already trading with them, Steve. So the argument that we need to leave to trade with them just fell apart beneath your very feet.
Well, no. We should just trade freely with the EU and the rest of the world.
But you just told me that she does.
Well, yeah, but so why are you complaining about it's terrible to leave?
Well, I'm saying we don't need to leave because she's already doing what many people told us we had to leave to do. I mean, and also, when you say
to control our own rules, we should rule ourselves.
So when she trades with a non-EU country, they obey our rules, do they? They don't have any say in it themselves.
Trade's trade.
Yes, and it involves 2 people agreeing on a mutually recognised set of rules. So it's never going to be our rules, is it? It's always going to be 2 bodies, 2 trading blocks agreeing on a mutually recognised set of rules.
But we're not ruled by people elected. It's becoming a dictator. The EU is a dictatorship.
No, but you know it isn't, Steve. I appreciate this word pops up a lot and things like that, but it isn't a dictatorship because it is, I mean, absolutely a democratically elected institution. Otherwise,
you can't have a one-size-fits-all.
We had elections. No, but again, one-size-fits-all means nothing, Steve. So let's go back. Let's go back to the original question. What in the future will make you look back and say to me, "You see, look what we're doing now that we couldn't do then"?
Argue and waste time. Argue, waste time, and
no. I mean, in the context of, to use your example, trading or anything else that's policy-based or political, 10, 15 years from now, what will we be doing that we can't do now that will make me go, do you know what, Steve, you had a point?
To a certain extent, not a great deal different, apart from, hopefully, we'll be just trading freely and fairly.
Yes, but you've already told me, using your wife's example, that she already does that. So what will she then, not just me, what will she be doing 15 years from now that will make her say... that will make her say to me, or okay, I mean, obviously, it doesn't have to be specifically her, anybody at all who can look back in 15 years and say, look what I can do now that I couldn't do then. What would you go for first, do you think, mate?
It puts in at stores. We don't know.
That's my view.
Let's just look after what we've got.
Yeah, well,
and
that's membership
in the right manner.
Steve, what we've got is membership of the single market and the customs union. So I agree with you. We should look after what we've got, but you think we should leave what we've got. So you can't look after it while leaving it. Final chance, 15 years, 20 years, 50 years from now, what will we be able to do that will make you look at me and say, you see, look what we can do now that we couldn't do then?
Don't know, but I just want to make our own rules, control our own country.
Yeah, but we've established that that's impossible if you want to trade with other countries, because you have to have a mutually agreed set of rules that you have both consented to abide by.
That's why we always have it's rules.
But you're the one that brought up rules, not me, Steve.
Look, just fairness and honesty, which MPs are not capable of.
Well, that might be, but that's not an answer to the question. As a passionate leaver, what it is, 15 or 20 years from now, that you'll be able to point at and say, look what we can do that we couldn't do then. What have you got, Stevie?
We'll just probably have less problems.
We'll just probably have less problems.
Yeah, less red tape and less problems.
Less red tape and less problems, but we should also look after what we've got.
Well, somehow. But I don't think no one's got the answer. But we're just wasting time.
I've got the answer.
Just get on.
I've got the answer. There's nothing that you can say to me will be happening in 15 years that you can point at and prove that Brexit was a good idea. But I don't want to conclude that until I've given you one more chance to answer the question.
Well, it's you can't answer it because we don't know.
So why are we doing it?
Look, I can only speak for what's happened to me in my job. We've had 8 years of torture, thanks to the bankers, in which none of them have been.
Yes, but Steve, if you're going to tell me things are going really well now, you know what I'm going to say, don't you?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, but they're not going very well because of the EU.
No, but I'm going to point out that we're in it.
Yeah, well, it's not working.
So we don't need.
So the EU won't exist.
I thought you just said things were going really well while we're in it. How is that an argument for leaving it?
Well, they're going well here, but they're not going very well over there, are they?
Over where?
In France, in Italy.
But you just said all I can talk for is my own job, and now you're talking about Emmanuel Macron and Italy.
No.
How did that happen, Steve?
We have to be linked to them. We have to be law takers.
So you don't want to trade with them anymore?
I do want to trade, but fairly. I don't want to take the rules.
But you can't trade without rules, Steve.
Basic rules, not just takers.
So what rule is it, top of the list, the rules you're looking forward to getting rid of, mate?
European Court of Justice.
And how does that affect trade?
Not a great deal, but trade.
So let's try again then. In the context of
still trade with us.
Yes, but according to rules that are set in this case by them. So what are the rules you're looking forward to getting rid of?
well, we haven't got it good enough businessmen to argue the case. When we buy more off them than they off us.
Steve, this is, mate, you know this is just word salad now. It's really simple to give me a rule that you're looking forward to getting rid of.
Oh, you're right. I couldn't put a finger on it, but...
Why'd you vote for it then, mate?
Oh, because we're... well, is it 90% of my area voted out?
I'm asking you, Steve. I can only talk to you one at a time.
Well, yeah, I voted out because I just want things to be more controlled in my country by my country.
Right.
That's all.
For example?
Pardon?
For example?
Well, immigration for a start.
Okay. It's
Control.
Thank you, mate. There we go. It's 10:46. Simple question, as ever with simple questions, not admitting simple answers, really. Here it is. What would we all agree a few years hence, okay, under Rees-Mogg and Digby-Jones's optimistic analysis, it might be 50 or 100 years. You can pick how many years it is, but the things that will be different about Britain or the United Kingdom, if it still exists, that we could look at, and I would say, well, that's a relief. I'm not going to lie to you. I thought things were going to be much, much worse than this. But I think it has to be something that's better than what we currently have. I don't think you can say, I'll be relieved if the economy's only gone down by X%, yada, yada, yada. It has to be better. So what would the future look like that would compel me to, with a degree of relief, but also a degree of irritation, because nobody likes being wrong. I'd happily be wrong about this. What would it look like for me to say, yeah, all right, I got that wrong, silly old me, but thank God I was wrong, eh? Damn, I was wrong. But thank God I was wrong. But damn, I was wrong. But also thank God I was wrong. You see what I mean? Yeah. Jack's in Woking. Jack, what have we got?
Hi, James.
Hello, Jack.
You were just asking in a few years what's going to be different once we leave the EU, or what would look better. And I believe that our goods and commodities that we buy are going to be more negotiable with the outside European countries outside the European Union rather than inside, because we're held to buy certain goods from the European Union at the moment rather than going elsewhere.
Well, also the countries with whom we have trade agreements via the European Union. About 750 separate treaties, I think.
Yeah, I got you that.
So what sort of countries are you thinking of?
Just, I'm not going specifically to certain countries, but... with respect, mate, you have to. Because I'm asking, right. You have to point at the thing that makes me go, some of our African countries, we can get cheaper fruits and vegetables than we do from the European Union.
No, we can't, because the 50 poorest countries in the world have something called an anything but arms agreement in place, which means we don't put any tariffs at all on their exports of things like cocoa and coffee. And that's the 50 cheapest, I beg your pardon, the 50 poorest countries on the planet. So that one's off the table. Next.
Well, you're just kicking me out the field, aren't you?
I'm not. Reality is.
The cost of fruits and vegetables are less there. If we were to purchase,
but there's no tariffs. There's no tariffs on any of them.
So we're allowed to just purchase our fruits and vegetables there. Then are we? They not have to come through Europe first, do they?
No, of course we can. Anything but arms is the phrase that you need, and that means that the European Union doesn't put tariffs on anything that's imported from the 50 poorest countries in the world, Jack.
Well, one of your other presenters the other day was saying how we have to get fruits and vegetables from the European Union.
Here's what you have to do, Jack. You have to ring him up and give him or her the evidence that I've now given to you for free.
I did try to do that.
You tried to phone up someone on LBC and argue the opposite of what you're arguing with me.
Yeah, you're right. I know.
Yeah,
I know. But also at the same time as well, I mean, I work in health and things like that. And another thing that gets me down as well is that the translators that we pay for them,
right.
And we pay them more than we pay our nurses, you see.
Yes.
And I just feel like in a few years...
Well, you could always learn another language.
Side of the film. Pardon?
You could always learn another language.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, that's what I mean. That would be much better, wouldn't it? Or we wouldn't be forking out on the NHS for the translators that we're paying the nurses that were.
So when we leave the European Union, we're going to sack all the NHS translators, are we?
No, they're not NHS translators, though, are they? They're self-employed.
Well, I don't know, but we're going to sack them all, are we?
Well, no, we're just gonna have the European citizens and citizens to just pay for them like they should do.
Right.
That's it.
Okay.
I don't really get it. Well, why do we have to pay for them if they can't talk our language and can't get through it?
So we're talking about French people, are we, and Spanish people and Romanians? Because what about all the non-EU countries that will just carry on paying for those translators? Will
they have to pay a bill? Or
Right.
they have health insurance?
No, that's not if they're living and working here.
But then they're paying their taxes, aren't they?
So are the European Union workers.
Well, they won't be once we're out the European Union, will they? Or they will have a visa.
When we leave the European Union people won't have to pay taxes anymore.
No, they will be paying taxes, but they'll have some sort of visa.
Hang on, I just need to clarify that because Ivan's about to put in a bid on a new car. Are you sure that they won't have to pay taxes anymore?
No, they will have to pay taxes.
But you just said they wouldn't.
Some right on the NHS, won't they?
But they pay taxes now.
When people aren't.
But they pay taxes now, Jack, and they have the same rights within the NHS that you're saying they're going to have after we leave.
But we're just paying for all the all I'm saying is we're paying for European Union people.
But they pay tax as well.
That we pay get more money.
They pay taxes. They pay tax as well, and the massive majority of European Union citizens working in this country won't need a translator, Jack, will they?
No, but then we won't be paying for that. That's exactly what we're saying. Like you just came back to a minute ago saying... Well,
so they don't really need translators, but leaving the European Union is a good idea because we won't have to pay the translators we don't need anymore.
If you're working over here and paying taxes, surely you've got some sort of grasp on the language, haven't you?
Well, that's my point, Jack.
Well, exactly. So why have we got to get translators in all the time then to sit next to our nurses?
I'm not aware of that many European language translators working within the health service, but of course, I'm sure there are a few. But should we put, given that this is your main reason for wanting to leave the European Union, you'll understand why. No, I know, which is why and it's not a field of expertise for me. So you need to tell me how many there are now.
I couldn't give you off the top of my head, but let's.
Well, is it in the hundreds, the millions, the thousands?
Well, let's just say I see up to, I don't know, let's say 5 an hour walking the door in one hospital.
But they'll be and they're all translating European languges, are they?
From different languages.
For example, which sort of languages?
80%.
Go on, which sort of languages, Jack?
We've got a lot of Spanish people that come over here.
Spanish translators in the NHS.
Polish. Yeah.
Okay, and that's why we should leave.
No, it's just so we shouldn't be paying the money that we're paying. We're paying them probably close to double what we're paying our nurses.
But they're probably English.
I think it's right when we shouldn't have to use them.
They're probably English.
Have to use them.
They're probably English, who just speak a bit of Spanish.
No, they're not.
Well,
it's
how
not
do you know?
That. It's not. I'm just saying the way it is. That's all it is. I just don't feel. I feel that's a sector that shouldn't really need to be there.
Yes. So
really.
for
you should be there, or if you need that service, you should have to pay for it yourself rather than having the NHS.
And that is when we look back, we'll be sitting there in 15 years in a time, and you will say to me, "You see, Brexit was a brilliant idea. We've got fewer translators in the NHS."
No, we've saved nearly £100 an hour per translator for however many people they translate per day, times however many hospitals there are in the country. The money process goes on, doesn't it? The
most popular languages that we currently pay translators for in the NHS are... You might want to write this down, mate, in case you do phone anyone else on the programme. Bengali, Gujarati, Lithuanian, Nepalese, Punjabi, Polish, Portuguese, Turkish and Urdu.
Okay.
Have a great day.
But that's not European Union, is it?
No, Jack. Oh, crikey. It's coming up to 11 o'clock. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If you think that it is unfair of me to publicly dismantle amateur callers like this, then I would refer you to Twitter, where I've just done exactly the same to Kay Burley, who is, of course, a professional broadcaster. So please don't fall into the trap of thinking that these sort of conversations are confined to the unqualified. It's coming up to 11 o'clock. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Hands up if you want to do a little bit more of this. But can we try and find some bona fide answers to the question of what would actually look like success? What would we look back on and say, yeah, all right, James, that showed you, didn't it? Or Chuka or Anna or Kenneth or Everyone, really. Business Secretary Greg Clark has told Sky News it would be crazy to leave the EU without a deal. That's where we've arrived now. We've arrived in a place where it's news to say the sun will come up tomorrow, or it would be crazy to jump out of an aeroplane without a parachute. That's news now, because Brexit has broken everything. That's considered, and I'm not criticising the editorial choice to describe that as news or to put that in a headline. It is actually news, because we've created a country in which abject nonsense has been afforded the same weight as evidence-based proof. And as soon as you've done that, as soon as you have abject nonsense on one side of the scales, you have evidence-based proof on the other side of the scales, then whenever somebody actually says, oh, by the way, that over there is abject nonsense, that somehow is news. It's a bit like John Humphrys on the Today programme interviewing the Prime Minister this morning, conducting the entire interview upon the presumption, which must be his own, because it's certainly not backed up by anything that could be remotely described as impartial or objective, conducting the entire interview, as a lot of the right-wing media does at the moment, although for the record, the rest of the Today programme doesn't deserve that description, conducting the entire interview as if there is a better Brexit that no one has been able to describe or deliver, but still conducting journalism on the presumption that there must be. I've spent 2.5 years asking these people to tell me what it is, and they can't. But people like John Humphrys still conduct interviews as if there must be. Well, there must be something better than this, because we didn't vote for this, but we voted for Brexit. So what is it? What is it down the line, down the road, down the rail tracks? I always hear a little echo of the Proclaimers when I say that phrase. Anyway, what is it down the rail tracks that will make you and me agree that you were right and I was wrong? Adam's in Edinburgh. Adam, what would you like to say?
Hello, yes.
Hello.
I run a Chinese marketing agency, and we have an office in a city called Chengdu in China. I voted Remain, but have seen a kind of change in attitude towards trading abroad. And
From where?
Really from up here, locally, so from Scotland, where people have realised that we don't know what's coming. I fully accept that it's probably going to be an omni-shambles politically, but trade-wise, interestingly with China, I don't know if you're aware of the Belt and Road Initiative?
I might be, but I don't think I am at this point. But I'm about to be, though, aren't I?
So it's I'm just simplifying it. Yes. China's spending about 3 trillion, so the T, on opening trade routes to the West, and it's what's really upsetting Trump and America, because they are investing heavily in creating trade routes through to the West, and the scale and size of China obviously is pretty what's the word?
Well, huge. Potentially it's huge. I mean, there are problems, as you will know better than I do, with regard to sort of copyright theft and snide factories turning out iPhones and all sorts of other things without respecting trademarks and copyrights. But I wouldn't be arrogant enough to suggest that those are powerful enough to undermine your suggestion. Is there anything that not being in the European Union, because you know what I'm going to say now, probably. If I was China and I was choosing between a market with 500 million people in it at the end of my bridge and a market with 60 million people in it, I know what I'd choose.
Okay, so China, I think China is the EU's second largest trading partner at the moment as it sits.
Is it Germany's biggest?
Sorry?
Is it Germany's biggest? There is a surprising... I'm just doing it off the top of my head.
To be honest with you, I don't have all the figures in front of me.
Sure.
But the situation as it sits is that, I mean, the scale of what's there, for example, where our office is it's a third bigger than London.
Yes.
It's got 12.5 million people in it.
Wowzers.
2 hours away is Chongqing, which has got 31 million people.
But don't we need to be manufacturing to benefit from a market of that size?
Well, yeah, to be honest with you, I mean, you know, if I said this is what's going to happen, I would be a fool. Because...
But just I don't want you to do that. I just want to get an idea of why you think it will be better out of the European Union in the context of trading with China than it would be in the European Union.
I can't answer that.
Okay, fair enough. I thank you for your honesty. I can tell you that Germany currently does 5 times more trade with China than the UK does.
Yeah. And I think that UK needs to then sort of look at itself. If it ends up, and as I say, I don't know where this is going to end up, but if it ends up where it's there to do its own deals, I just wanted to point out that I think short term it's going to be, calamitous. But long term, there is a potential there.
I hope you're right. And I don't need to knock every ball out of the park this morning. But you haven't answered my question about a 500 million person market somehow being less preferable to China than a 60 million person market.
So but that's what I'm saying is that if we're out of it, then that's what's looking ahead. Considering that also India will be benefiting from this as well. So there's 1.4 billion in India. So you're looking at 3 billion people pretty much on that side of the world.
Yes, but
who are going to be benefiting.
But again, why would any trading agreement signed by any of the countries you mentioned with a market of 60 million consumers, i.e. us, be more attractive to our trading partner than a market with 500 million people in it?
So my question back would be, what if you're in the union? Of course, you're part of that mix. If you're not, this is the only kind of light that I can see from my own business perspective, and I'm seeing people being much more proactive. So
you're not saying it's going to be better, but you're saying this might constitute
an opportunity.
A replacement for some of the stuff we're going to lose.
Potentially,
So that's not 15 years from now will be better, but it's 15 years from now it might not be quite as bad as some people predict, because we might be doing some trade with China, even though we'd have been a much more attractive trading partner if we'd remained part of a 600 million person single market. 500 million.
Potentially, yes. I can't.
All right. No, you're a good man. And marketing, of course, being a service, is something that is exportable and probably actually something worth piling in on. Because if Chinese companies are looking to break into British markets, they will need advice on how to do so. But I don't know what the return would be. Do you see what I mean? I don't know what, because Adam mentioned bridges and tunnels, I think. What's in the traffic going in the other direction? What are we sending to China as they send, well, pretty much everything to us? And of course, they already do. I think it's third. Germany's third biggest trading partner is currently China. If you look at individual countries, it goes America, France, China. But of course, if you look at the European Union as a homogenous bloc, it will overtake the United States and move into first place. 10 minutes after 11. Gareth is in Matlock. Gareth, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Gareth.
Well, I think I've got about 10 years on you because...
I'm 46 3/4, Gareth.
Well, I'm 55.
Yes.
So I can say that I went to school, the comprehensive school, in the 70s. And I remember seeing my geography teacher gave me a map showing all the prospective European highways that were going to be built with our connections with the European Union. Now,
this was in the 1970s.
That was in the 70s. Right. You know, it was all a big focus on the bright future for Europe, which, it has been, and we've had a lot of good connections with Europe, and we still do. But the problem is, I don't think we've ever actually participated properly. And I think, to a certain extent, the country as a whole has taken its eye off the ball. Being a member of Europe has made us quite lazy. I've lived in France in the 90s. I've seen...
Thanks to freedom of movement.
All the infrastructure, freedom of movement, I agree. But then again, in the same house I lived in, I was living with some Americans who didn't have freedom of movement, and one of them still lives in Portugal. So
£48,000 a year you'll need to be earning to work in Germany as a third country.
But in any case...
Yeah, carry on anyway.
My sort of vision for leaving Europe wasn't walking away from Europe per se, but it was that we could have a bright future and we could focus on renewing the country. We need some new infrastructure and we need to do it ourselves. I think it's made us lazy. I think one of the routes that we're supposed to...
Well, I'm not lazy, and I thought we already had a bright future. So what sort of infrastructure are you talking about?
Roads, bridges, tunnels... Just things that we should be doing ourselves.
You mean like HS2, the Channel Tunnel, Crossrail?
Well, maybe as Boris says, we could build a bridge to Northern Ireland from Scotland.
Yes.
But the thing is, what I'm trying to say
I'm not going to let that pass. I apologise if it feels as if you're being hectored, but Boris Johnson's suggestion to build a bridge to Northern Ireland is... that even by his standards, it's absolutely insane. So I'd ask you, in addition to HS2, Crossrail, the Channel Tunnel, I'm sure there's a few others, but they currently elude me. What would you like to be building?
I'm talking to you from Derbyshire.
Yes.
I'm a councillor in Amber Valley.
Yes.
And the last big project we had was when they put the A38 from Derby towards Mansfield across our Amber Valley Borough Council area.
Yes.
And in the early 80s, there was supposed to be a road that went from the M1 to the A38.
Yes.
Part of that road was never finished.
And that was because we were in the EU.
Well, no, it's just that we need to...
So when we leave the EU, will they finish it?
Well, what I'm trying to say is I think Britain as a whole needs to look to itself and do some improvements and not rely on the EU to do it. Because
Why do we have to be outside the EU to finish off the A38?
No, the point is because when you go to France, as I'm probably sure you have, when you
I'll never work there like you have, and now I'll never be able to.
Alps,
Carry on.
I've seen motorways, bridges, tunnels under...
But they're all in the EU.
You can't imagine. Yeah, they're in the EU, but these...
So they haven't been prevented from building infrastructure by membership of the EU. You can't really say to me, we need to leave the EU to build infrastructure. Look how much infrastructure there is in France and Italy. That doesn't work at all, does it, Gareth?
The focus of EU development and its aspiration has been to put money in projects in other places and not the United Kingdom. You've seen in places like Ireland where they've had roads that go to nowhere.
No,
we as a country need to have...
Can you name that road?
Well, I don't know. I've been told.
Yeah, but can I ask who told you?
Well, there are roads in Ireland.
There are roads in Ireland, but can I ask you who told you about the ones that don't lead anywhere?
Listen, I've got no problem.
I am listening. That's your problem.
But no, well, you listen to me for a little bit.
I have, and you said there are roads in Ireland that don't go anywhere. I'm asking you to tell me about them.
The United Kingdom can do better in the next decade.
You're telling me the United Kingdom can do as well as France when it comes to building infrastructure?
We can have a better relationship with Europe as a third country.
Right.
We can still travel to Europe, and we will have a much better relationship with them.
But we haven't agreed that.
It's about time we made a better country for our children and our grandchildren.
Leaving the European Union isn't going to achieve any of that, is it, Gareth, as you've just proved?
It will be something. It will be an astonishing advantage.
It will be an astonishing advantage. Details, Gareth? Details?
The details are in 10 years' time.
Yeah.
We will be a better outward-looking country.
That's not a detail, mate.
We've never participated with the European project properly.
But you lived in France.
We didn't go into the Euro.
You lived in France.
Yeah.
How can you say that we didn't participate with the European project properly? I'm inclined to agree with you, but you're not a very good example. You worked in France.
Wait a minute.
I am.
You don't have to be a member of a union of countries to go and live in another country and work.
But you have to have an agreement with them.
You just have a visa.
You have to have an agreement with them. And having a visa... Yes, but Gareth, here's the thing. Gareth, come here a minute. Here's the thing that you're now doing, and you probably don't realise it. I'm going to let you off the roads in Ireland that don't lead anywhere, all right? Because it's nearly Christmas, and most of us are thinking about the other Chris Rea song. All right, we're not thinking about the road to nowhere. We're thinking about driving home for Christmas. So we'll let that pass. I may resurrect it in January. What you're doing now is telling me that it will be better 10 years from now because what you can currently do without a visa, you'll be able to do with a visa. How do you think you've ended up doing this on national radio?
We will focus. Instead of, listen, we've become lazy. Our civil servants...
You've said that 7 times now. So here's the question. How is visa-free travel somehow inferior to visa-necessary travel, Councillor?
Make any difference because if I want to go to this summer I went to America and I had to get
on holiday.
an ESTA.
Yes,
I had an ESTA and I went to America.
And if you'd gone to France, you wouldn't have had to jump through that hoop. So you're arguing now that hoops are better than no hoops.
So according to our withdrawal agreement,
yes,
we're going to be able to travel to France in the same way that we always have.
Only during the transition period.
Well, we'll see what.
But you knew that. You're an elected politician. Can I ask what party you represent in Matlock?
I'm Conservative.
Oh, gosh. It's 11:17, where things haven't gone entirely as planned, but I hope it has been diverting, possibly enlightening, although not necessarily in a positive way. There is a failure at the heart of Brexit discussions, of course, and that is to pin people down on what precisely is going to get better. The original arguments, of course, hinged upon the idea that we'd be able to opt out of the politically difficult elements of membership. Many people, of course, have a problem with immigration, whether that's justified or not is moot. The existence of people who have a problem with it is a matter of recorded fact. It is also, I suppose, worth pointing out at this point that the amount of concern, the levels of concern go up and down according to the amount of media manipulation and the amount of time given to demagogues, rather than according to the actual lived experiences of people whose opinions about immigration go up according to media coverage and manipulation by racist demagogues. So when you move beyond that and you say, what is going to be better? What 10, 15 years from now will enable me to say to you, crikey, I got that a bit. I can't imagine I'm going to have to say I got it horribly wrong. But I'll have to say, do you know what? That's actually better than it was when we were in. That thing over there, that's better. I could, if I was feeling pedantic, insist that you prove the entire country is better. But for the purposes of today's phone-in, I'll be happy just with examples of things getting better. And I get some, I don't know why I get upset about this. I suppose it's because I like people ringing me up and giving me an opportunity to help them see the light. But don't have a go at the people who ring in. That's so cowardly. If you're on the other side of this argument from me, they've got more guts than you. They've got the same opinions as you, and they've fallen for the same rubbish that you've fallen for, but they've got the guts to ring in and have it examined. And the only way you can cling on to your delusions is by not ringing in. So you know, that was an elected councillor there. I think it's really ugly to claim that people who've had the nerve to try and argue your point and haven't done very well are stupid or witless because they're putting their money where their mouth is. You're still hiding. 11:24 is the time. And then on my side of the argument, the Remain side, the right side, what would make us wrong? I can't put much on that, but I'm not in business. I'm not an exporter or an importer particularly. What I don't think you can say to me, your children will have to jump through hoops to live and work and study in those 27 countries. But hey, look, that's okay because this deal here is better. And we haven't even touched on Northern Ireland. Steve is in Sandbach in Cheshire. Steve, what can you tell us?
Well, I've got a small company and I make car components. And I supply them to the EU, different ones.
Yes.
I do get inquiries quite often from America. But I can't make components for them because they want their components to be cadmium plated.
Right.
And that is illegal in the EU.
Is it? Why is it illegal? Do we know? Because they consider cadmium to be dangerous.
Well, yes, they say cadmium can be very dangerous and it's carcinogenic.
When you say they, do you mean manufacturers say that or doctors say that?
The EU.
Yeah, but who? Where do they get their advice from?
Well, this is
scientists.
This is one. Well, not really.
Who then?
Another substance I use is a polysulfonate.
Yes.
And about 4 years ago, they said they were going to totally ban it in the EU, which is fine, you know.
So
but then Aerospace says, hang on a second. This was Airbus in France. Said,
yes.
Hang on a second. We use this in one of our processes that takes a process that is very, very dangerous and makes it totally safe.
Yes.
It really is absolutely brilliant for health and safety. Why do you want to ban it? And they said, well, this person over here said he wants to ban it, and I forget who it was. And
I can't really engage with you with so little detail. Okay, carry on then.
They said that he had no evidence at all.
But you can't remember who he is, so I can't really check.
So then it wasn't banned, so it hasn't been banned.
Yeah, but we're talking about cadmium, right?
But then we talk about cadmium.
Yeah. Well, why do they think that's hazardous?
Well, probably scientists somewhere or other said, well, we think it might be carcinogenic. But
without any proof or without any experiments? Or are they just sort of, what do they do? Just close their eyes and stick a pin in the elemental table?
Well, I'm sure they did lots of things. But the point I'm making is that I can't make these components for America. Perhaps the American people are different to British people or European people, and you know, cadmium probably gives European people cancer, but it doesn't give them cancer in America or something.
Well, we know that America has much lower standards for a whole heap of regulations. Have you seen the stuff about how many maggots you're allowed to have in a kilo of rice?
Well,
it's not that funny, mate. If it ends up on your plate, it's lung problems and liver disease, isn't it? Lung problems.
Anyway, there are certain regulations that really do tie us down, that do
we need to be clear about this, Steve. Cadmium was banned by the European Union. I'm going to have to have a little speak. I'm going to have to speak for a little bit at this point, because you've brought us a lot of stuff. I can't really talk about the bloke. I can't. Hang on, mate. Hang on, because I do a little bit of swatting up sometimes when I'm talking to people. Obviously, I can't talk about the bloke who can't remember who said that thing about the other stuff. But cadmium was banned by the European Union because it causes lung problems and liver disease. We know that in America, business gets to write its own rules, which is why they're allowed much higher standards, much higher levels of maggots in food, or worms or various other bacteria. It's why they are allowed to sell chlorinated chicken and beef that's been ramped up to the eyeballs with hormones. And I appreciate it's annoying for you not to be able to make stuff that is more dangerous than the stuff that you make for the European Union, but it's not going to improve my life, is it?
I don't know about that, because...
Well, the scientists do.
Do you fly on aeroplanes?
Never. No, Steve, never.
You don't?
No, never. I go everywhere by pogo stick.
You see, because if you go on an aeroplane... Because I recognise these things when I see them.
Yes.
And you go on an airplane, and I see I got the window seat, and I see them lift up the flaps.
Yeah.
You know, and you can see the workings inside. They're all cadmium plated.
Yes. But they're not in my car, are they?
Do you drive a Volvo?
I do, actually, yes.
Oh, right, yeah. I think you might find some of your brake components are cadmium plated.
Well, they're made in the European Union, though, which has banned it.
Well, I don't know how they get away with that.
Well, you should probably look into it before you reach these conclusions.
Well, I'm just saying.
You told me you're not allowed to make stuff with cadmium in the European Union, but Volvo are allowed to make stuff with cadmium in the European Union. You must see, Steve, a slight problem in those twin statements.
Yes, I do. I just looked under the bonnet of one recently when I wanted to buy a new car, and I thought, that looks like cadmium. But anyway, is
it? That's the extent of your research into this?
Well, yes, that's the extent.
Looking out of plane windows and looking under the bonnet of a Volvo. So, all right, let's pretend you're 100% right about everything, and Volvo is secretly inserting illegal goods under the bonnet of their cars. How does this improve my life?
Well, I don't know as it does, but you just said...
All right, Britain then. How does it improve Britain?
And I could do trade with a lot more people around the world if I wasn't tied down with so many regulations.
If you were allowed to use materials that are proven to be carcinogenic, you could sell more stuff. That's great. I get that, but I don't want to get cancer, so I'm quite happy that you're not allowed to. I don't want you to get cancer either, Steve, actually, because I'm a liberal. We're having one of those mornings where you just wonder quite how anybody ever thought that the Emperor had lovely clothes on, because all of the people still persuaded to praise those luxurious robes are, well, having a bit of a mare, I suppose you'd have to say. The question was supposed to be, what's going to get better? What will we look at and say, there you go, you see, Nadine Dorries was right all along and the Governor of the Bank of England was wrong. Or you can move into areas other than economics and industry and agriculture, and imports and exports, and pretty much anything you want. So far we've got the European Union stops me from using carcinogens in my car component firm. We'll get rid of all the translators, but they're not actually from EU countries. What was the first fella, Steve? Can you remember? What was his? I can't remember. But anyway, I don't think he knew either, to be fair, so you can't really criticise me for not being able to remember. And again, I shall say it again, don't get cross with the people ringing in, okay? Because no one can do any better. This is what happens when you conduct a Brexit conversation without being enslaved to the idea that there is a mythical, unspecified, undescribed Brexit that's so much better than the one Theresa May has negotiated, or the ones that actually have been written down. Two phrases I've said over the course of the last 2.5 years, and if you knit them both together, everything makes sense. The first was, it will be like getting eggs out of a baked cake, doing this, okay? Which is fine. because even if you managed to get the eggs out of a baked cake, you could still argue that you were in a better off position than you were when you had a cake. And the second one is, the minute you write it down, it falls apart. Because as soon as you write it down, it disappoints a huge number of people who voted for a different flavour. And it has to, because if you've got people saying we can be like Norway, and you've got people saying on the same side, we need to stop immigration, we need to abolish freedom of movement, you could never have a Brexit that worked. This is why the phrase Brexit means Brexit was so outrageous. So outrageous. But I am still amenable to the idea that something could shake down, something could happen, something could break loose at the back of the scrum that looks like success. I just want you to describe it to me. Tommy's in Dublin. Tommy, what can you tell us?
Hi, James. First, I do have to, I know it's not Mystery Hour, but I do have to do a steward's inquiry on your caller. Gary, I believe, said that there was roads in Ireland that go nowhere.
Yeah, it may have been a small nod to Chris Rea, although it did seem to me to be a genuine claim.
Well, actually, he's right, James.
Is he?
You believe it. There are roads in Ireland that go nowhere. Unfortunately for Gary, they were built by the British government.
They what?
When they were built by the British government when they were in charge. During the famine, we'd loads of starving people, but we couldn't give them free food, so they built roads up mountains and things like that.
I think you know and I know that those are not the roads that Gareth was referring to.
Probably. And
Carry on.
I have an intangible, maybe, asset to leaving.
Kind of only want tangibles.
You kind of only want tangibles.
Yeah.
I'm afraid I don't really have any. But I did think that maybe, perhaps, you might be better being British while the rest of us are still European. Although I've never met anyone from the country Europe. I mean, we all, in Ireland, we describe ourselves as Irish. And
yes.
French is French, but...
And also European. I see it as a bit like supporting Kidderminster Harriers, but also cheering for England. Or Ireland.
Yes, but it's kind of like the way, I don't think I've ever met a British person either. I've met English people and Welsh people and Scottish people and Northern Irish people.
Yes, that's true.
You know, we all tend to...
I think people from the Commonwealth often describe themselves as British. This is something I learned during Windrush, is that because I think I'd describe myself as British, but also English. But people from the Commonwealth might describe themselves as Jamaican, but also British. So there is something there. It is a kind of umbrella term. But in terms of why the country will be improved, feeling more British.
Yeah, I think, like, if we liken it to the struggle for Irish independence, we voted many times for self-harm. We voted in the ballot box and with guns and bombs and all sorts of things, if you could say voting that way, with rebellions, in order to leave the biggest empire the world had ever seen. And we were financially worse off after it. But the one tangible we had from it was we had our culture. It was born again. And unlike the EU, the British governments were enacting plans to eradicate our culture. For example, our national sport, hurling, has just become a UNESCO special.
I didn't know that. Do you know what they say about the and forgive me for being discriminating against Gaelic. I'm not. I'm just recognising that the majority of people in the Republic of Ireland speak English. That thing Oscar Wilde said about two countries divided by a common language, actually, he was looking he could have focused a little bit closer to home, couldn't he? Because we don't know anything about this stuff. And never mind what's going on in the Republic, what's going on in the other bit of the United Kingdom that's attached to the Republic. We know next to nothing about that as well. And it's this kind of ignorance that creates what you've described as people, I know your tongue's in your cheek, but people will feel more British. And that's the best it's going to be. That's the best we've got.
I think, like, you know, in 10 years, you can sit in a bar with your buddy, clap each other on the back, drinking British bitter, probably brewed in Peru because it's cheaper, and be more British.
And be more British, which is not necessarily a bad thing, although you have to demonstrate how it is tangibly
better,
preferable, tangibly preferable to being both British and a member of the European Union. 03456060973. Missed you hour after 12. Goodness knows, going to need it. Helen is in Finchley. Helen, what would you like to say?
Hello. Great.
Hello.
First of all, just quickly, thanks for being the voice of sanity and truth for the last 2.5 years.
You're very welcome.
What I wanted to say was, even if the country works out more prosperous than expected, that's all very well, but how is that going to help my children? No longer able to live and work freely in other EU countries, opportunities I had. So it's basically taking away their EU citizens' rights. So freedom of movement basically works both ways. It takes our rights away too. What frustrates me so much is the Brexiters banging on about, immigrants, stopping the immigrants. But what about our citizens' rights? And another thing that they never raise is the fact that the bureaucracy and the cost implications and the red tape with having to set up a visa system, how is that going to help business? And so the Conservatives are basically anti-business.
Yes, well, you know what Boris said.
Boris Johnson said.
Yes, and we can't repeat that word on the radio.
No, we cannot.
We're better brought up than him, Helen, you and me.
So, I mean, and the fact is that even if we end up more prosperous than expected, we could have been even more prosperous.
Well, that's the thing that I don't know. Can I ask your advice about that?
Well, I mean...
I need to ask you genuinely as a listener to the programme, because I'm going to have a choice for presuming that things don't get better than they currently are. Then the other side, so to speak, are going to move very quickly and very strongly towards trying to argue that things aren't as bad as they could have been, and they're going to be very keen to portray that as a mark of success. So they will, for example, say, the economy was supposed to collapse by 11%, and it's only collapsed by 30%. But my decision that I have to make in the coming months is whether or not I then point out, but that's still less than 11%.
But the thing is, I think what we really need...
You're not listening. I need your advice. Do I spend the rest of my career...
I want our schools to be funded properly, and our NHS. My children's primary school and secondary schools are having enforced staffing cuts. Yes. And I talk to my MP, and all I get is, really there's nothing we can do about it. I mean, why are we wasting all this money on Brexit and Brexit advisor and all the rest of it when we could be funding our schools properly? I mean, it's just, it's iniquitous.
Yes, it is. And the balanced response, to pretend this is the BBC for a moment, would be to say, yes, but we won't be sending payments to the EU anymore, so we can spend all that money on schools and hospitals.
Oh, yes, well, that's all being thrown into complete disrepute. We know that. And these people that talk about, under WTO, we wouldn't have all these rules. But, I mean, there are rules in any trade organisation. We live in an interconnected world. Wherever we go, we're going to have rules. And they keep saying, let's, we won't have any of these rules.
Yeah, but we'll be able to have carcinogenic car parks.
Yes.
So we need to add that to the list, in fact. Blue passports.
Yes.
We will perhaps be able to catch more fish, although given that 80% of our exports currently go to other European Union countries, quite what we're going to do with them after we've caught them, if selling them is subject to tariffs, I don't know. But these are details, Helen, mere details. Yes. Blue passports, yes. Fish, yes. Carcinogenic car parts, woohoo! You see, it's not all bad.
Yeah, sure. Can I just say that if any Remainers can get down to Parliament to support Steve Bray and the fellow Remainers, get down there now, because it's just...
He's there on Thursdays. He's not there on Fridays.
I know.
I know you know, but I've got a few other people listening, not just you.
They're also so mild-mannered, They're so, they're not sort of aggressive and in your face.
No, they're not. They're sneering, condescending metropolitan elites who've done military service and taken a sabbatical from their careers to protest against this disgusting dismantling of democracy and accountability. But,
the other thing we need, if we do get this referendum, we do need the UK citizens who've been living for more than 15 years in the EU able to vote. This affects them more than anybody, and they need to have their voice, as do 16, 17-year-olds who will be the most affected by this disaster.
Yeah.
We need to get that out there.
I didn't say today, give me a ring and I'll make you feel better, did I?
And as for John Humphreys...
Yes.
I mean, I was just there shouting at my radio.
You should listen to a lefty like Nick Ferrari instead.
What can I say?
Nothing. Let's go to the break. Blue passports, fish, carcinogenic car parts. What will be the tangible benefits of Brexit a few years down the line? I suppose we should add chlorinated chicken and hormone-injected beef to that list. Also, if we do some sort of trade deal with America, is it time to dig out those food regulations with regard to the amount of maggots and stuff that you're allowed in American grain and rice packages? I think, was it Liam Fox that said that wasn't true when Ian Dale asked him about it, with reference to me pointing it out, and now everyone accepts that it is. But here's the problem, you see. Liam Fox will be interviewed again soon, and no one will point out to him, you've said untrue things. Same with Boris Johnson. Oh, the citizens of the European Union living here will be protected by the Treaty of Vienna if we Brexit. Proven not true. Jacob Rees-Mogg on tariffs, cheap shoes for peasants. Proven not to be true. Even the Sun withdrew it, but Rees-Mogg still got it on his Twitter account. David Davis will be in Germany the morning after the result, not in Brussels, doing an individual trade deal with Germany. Definitive and demonstrative evidence that he doesn't understand anything, but he's still there. Dominic Raab talking about going back to Brussels to renegotiate more strongly, utterly ignoring reality. That's why these people are being allowed to create the chaos that is now engulfing us. So start with the chaos and work your way back. If you don't like me or my continuing correctness, then start at the end, not the beginning. Start at the chaos and work your way back. How could we have ended up in a place where people are still appearing on broadcast media saying things that have been proven to be untrue? And why are people who've said lots and lots of untrue things allowed to start every single interview or panel show with a clean slate? That's the bit I don't get. Well, I do get it, but I don't understand why it's not stopped. I got a tweet from a producer at Radio 4 this morning after I pointed out that John Humphreys had again conducted an interview with the Prime Minister on the presumption that some undescribed, unspecified, to my mind non-existent, Brexit exists, and she'd failed to deliver it. And just very simply pointing out, this is another deluded, disappointed Brexiter claiming that things could have somehow gone better without explaining how. Then you get a tweet off a Radio 4 producer saying, I think you'll find he got a line about... It began with an as well. And I never, ever, ever reply to tweets that begin but I made an exception today. I said, this is the problem, mate. That is not a Brexit interview Prime Minister result, a putative vote on the backstop 2 years from now. That's not why you should be talking to this woman. For a start, you could have asked her that if the deal fails, would you personally prefer no deal or no Brexit? That's what I'd love to know. She probably wouldn't answer it, but that's fine. Let her waffle on a bit about hypotheticals and then ask her again. And then again. And then again. And then again. And then it's time for the travel news. Where are we going next? Harrow. Sanjay is in Harrow. Sanjay, what have you got?
Hi, James. Good to speak to you.
Likewise.
I just want to, I think I can, the reason why I think we're going to be in a much better place in 5 years' time after this Brexit process is because, A, I don't think Brexit is going to happen.
No, you're cheating.
No, it's not going to happen. But I think we've had to go through this process because picking up on your last comments about chaos.
Yes.
The chaos theory is you have to make things worse before you can appreciate how good you have it now. And let's face it...
Yeah, but that means we have to leave.
No, we don't have to leave because...
No, but they're not going to realise how bad it is until we've actually done it. This is why Susanna Reid is the doyenne of broadcasters in Britain at the moment.
Right.
Because that's what she says. She's the only person that's made me stop and think about remaining, because she says then that these people will not realise until they see it with their own eyes.
Yeah, but I think you don't need all of them to see it. You just need the good 10, 20% who voted, through their ignorance or whatever it is for Brexit, realise, hold on, the grass isn't green.
It's not ignorance. Through the incredibly well-funded and very, very well-organised efforts of a whole bunch of invested billionaires and secretive hedge fund managers and newspaper owners. It's not ignorance, mate. Ignorance would be waking up in the morning, tossing a coin and voting according to the result. It's not ignorant to vote according to what you've been told by Boris Johnson, by David Davis, by Liam Fox, by Jacob Rees-Mogg, by the Daily Mail, by the Sun, by the Daily Express, by 30 years' worth of misinformation in every newspaper in the country. I know it's unfair that I'm picking you up on this because I've called them ignorant millions of times, but I'm trying to be a better person, Sanjay.
No, I understand, but I think that, yes, I also call them ignorant because they don't have the ability to actually see through the lies they've been told. But now I think they can. I think there's
have you been listening to the programme today, Sanjay?
No, 100%. I think there's a critical mass of people who are now saying, you know what, this is not good for us. And therefore, we're going to step back right at the last minute. And the reason why I think that in 5 years' time, we're going to look back at this and say, you know what, Brexit was really great for us? It's because, as a country, as a culture, we've never felt European. We just haven't. You know, we're part of Europe just because of, geographic...
Geography and history, those little chestnuts.
Yeah, no. You know, let's look. We've never felt European. But going through this process, I think what we're going to find is a culture shift, especially amongst the young, and especially amongst the people who start to question people who say something to them. Say, well,
so you're giving me a positive, but it's a positive that will come about of remaining and doing Brexit, things that wouldn't have happened unless we'd done Brexit. But you're not actually telling me the positives of post-Brexit. You're telling me the positives of remaining with Brexit in the rearview mirror.
Exactly, and I think your question. I'm just using a subtlety of your question of saying Brexit. I'm defining Brexit as this process that we've gone through.
Yes.
And the other thing is, Conservatives have this real small but hardcore Eurosceptics, and this is going to be this is going to lance their boil. And potentially then, we're going to be in a place where
I just saw Ian Duncan Smith when you said that. I literally flashed into my mind's eye.
That's because I telepathically...
did you? Did you send me a mind meld? Fair enough.
Exactly. Yes, I did,
That was horrible.
I'm glad it worked.
His head was like a big pustule and you squeezed him by the ears and all this pus came out the top of his bombs. It was absolutely disgusting.
Yeah, and you know what? That's going to help our country in a tangible way.
I agree.
All this noise that we see, that's stopping us doing our real jobs, you know?
Well, here's the question. No, go on. Sorry, your industry.
Yeah, so in my work, you know, government decisions just aren't being made because of Brexit. You know, the oxygen has just been sucked out of all these departments, central government departments, because they're dealing with Brexit. And we should be dealing with what impacts us in our real lives. You know, the Conservative government, how many elements of their manifesto are even in the process of fulfilling? They're not, because everything is Brexit. Once we boil this lance from the Conservatives, you know what? We can get on with governing the country, we can have a culture change, and we can feel European. And
it's interesting that. I don't know, because we're an island nation, and that's a big... You know, my theory was that if we'd put road signs up with European cities on them, not just in Dover, but even perhaps in London or in you know, the Kingdom of Fife, if it actually said Oslo X miles or Berlin X miles, because I do, and it's an odd thing. I was visiting a friend of mine who's a staunch Eurosceptic, despite living in Gran Canaria and having a holiday home in the south of France. I was visiting him in the south of France. He used to be a staunch Eurosceptic. And I suddenly got struck by the fact that all of the road signs featured foreign cities, and it just made things feel less divided. And we've decided to divide things more.
Exactly, and that's cultural. And the final thing is, all these Brexiteers saying, oh, we're Great Britain, you know, we rule the waves, you know, we're sixth largest country in the world. Well, actually, you are that because you're part of Europe. And once we realise...
Yeah, but we're not going to realise it unless we leave. You've got more optimism than me.
But like I say you only need that 10, 20% to feel... have the change, because they're the people who are thinking things through correctly.
Oh, yeah, but you keep hearing... But you know that the people who ring me are not exceptions. They're not outliers. They're not fringe people. They say the phrases. They don't know what they mean. They fall apart. But there's still 40-odd, 50% of voters in that category. And I'm rude now, and I don't like it, because, of course, I should be describing it differently. I should be describing they've got feelings that are valid and relevant, and they want to feel different from how they feel now. And then, of course, I get even more annoying when I ask how they've ended up feeling the way they feel, and they tell me lots of things that aren't true. And that's not moving, mate. I have to agree with Jenny Russell in the Times today. Second referendum supporters like me need to be careful what we wish for. Last word, I promise you, on Brexit, because this is fascinating, and you may have missed it. I think it's in the Financial Times from the acting CEO of the Confederation of Norwegian Enterprise in Oslo, which I presume, although I could be wrong, I stress that, I presume it's their equivalent of the CBI, and it effectively says that Norway is not going to be Norway in the context of European Union futures. The European Economic Area has served Norway well. It ensures our companies full participation in the EU single market because we take on all relevant legislation. We would definitely welcome the UK's continued participation in the single market, but would you be ready to go from being a rule maker to being a rule taker? I appreciate the Confederation of Norwegian Enterprises acting CEO probably doesn't know as much about what it's like to do business in Norway as Andrew Bridgen and Nadine Dorries do, but I think just out of politeness we should probably read this little letter to the end. Would you be ready to go from being a rule maker to being a rule taker? Entering into the EEA means accepting these obligations. It is a balanced agreement with rights and duties. If any EEA, EFTA states do not fulfill their obligations, parts of the agreement may be suspended and the other EFTA states like Norway would suffer. So this is Norway saying, you can't be like us, we don't trust you. I think I've got this right. I mean, it literally has just popped in front of me now and I'm doing it on the hoof, but I reading the words and knowing what words mean, they're saying, you can't be like Norway, you can't have the deal we've got because we don't trust you, and if you mess it up, we'll get punished. That's why, continues Ole Erik Almlid, that's why we suggest that Britain should have a separate EEA agreement, a third pillar. It could be a blueprint of the existing agreement and therefore an off-the-shelf solution acceptable to the EU. So they can have an EEA agreement, but they can't be part of the EEA because the other members of the EEA don't trust us anymore. Well done, everyone.